Osborn is an associate clinical professor of internal medicine at Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine and a traumatic brain injury survivor. She is also an advisor on the TBI education and prevention to government agencies, including the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., and the Michigan Department of Health. Pre-injury, she was a physician in Detroit who instructed interns and residents. That life ended abruptly one summer evening when her bicycle was struck by an automobile and she sustained a traumatic brain injury. Claudia underwent extensive rehabilitation in Manhattan at the Brain Injury Day Treatment Program of New York University Medical Center, and now lectures on TBI education across the country. How did you sustain your TBI or traumatic brain injury?
I was a physician at the time. I was practicing internal medicine in the inner city of Detroit. And, I follow my own doctorly advice. And so I went out bicycling after work. And this was in the late 1980s. And back then I'm a cross-country bicyclist, but when I was riding in my neighborhood, I wouldn't wear a helmet. And of course, I'm a big helmet advocate today, but we didn't think that way back then. And so I was just riding on the side streets. Apparently, I don't remember that day, but I'm told I was riding with my partner, Marcia, through the neighborhood, and someone lost control of their vehicle, drove on the wrong side of the road, and struck me head on, and I was catapulted over their car, landing on my head.
Oh, wow.
So, would have been better with the helmet. Would have been better if I hadn't had multiple prior concussions. A lot of things would have been better, but, life happens.
No, I mean, of course. And there's no way to plan your life, and it was probably, it was a shock, and but you kind of make the best of it, which clearly you have done. Upon your traumatic brain injury, you attempted to go back to work, but you found that there were challenges. So what was the process like of realizing that you had these challenges as a physician?
I don't remember personally the first kind of 9 months after the injury, but my understanding, which I of course write about, is that when you only know yourself to be one way, as someone who walks and talks and thinks, you just assume you're still doing that, even though you've stopped doing those things. So I had lost most of my language skills. I had lost use of and control of the right side of my body. I, of course, lost a great deal of my cognitive function, but I didn't know any of those things were true. So I did attempt to go back into the hospital environment where I was a director of residency training for other young physicians and attending physician. Fortunately, my young staff was aware that I was dysfunctional. It was also pretty obvious to them. They didn't let me do anything. They just kind of lead me around, like you lead around a puppy. Apparently I went several days before internists are just very obsessive compulsive, and I was in a position to realize that I hadn't checked an x-ray on someone who was going to have surgery. That just wouldn't happen, because someone could die that way,
Of course.
It made me realize, the fact that people periodically, well, they were saying it constantly, but I only periodically remember people saying, something is wrong, made me seek help from a neurologist who, of course, said you have to stop work and So we see to this, and that was the last time I ever uh, practiced medicine. So not
Yeah.
that I was actually practicing, but I was in the hospital with a medical license.
Yeah. And that must have been very difficult.
Yeah, but of course at the time I didn't know that I was giving it up.
Right.
It took about a year to develop even really modest awareness of my challenges. When you have a global aphasia, but it's caused by a diffuse brain injury, you think, well, the reason you aren't following conversation is you're tired and they're not saying anything important. And you think that you don't have many thoughts, so there's nothing you really wanted to say anyway. And if you do speak, you don't realize that your words aren't reflective of any of those thoughts. So you don't even recognize, oh, you're not speaking, or say, oh my goodness, I can't talk, or I'm right-handed, but I can't use my right hand. You are blessed initially, and it is a little bit of a cushion initially. It causes trouble later, but with the fact that you really you don't have the computer working to tell you something's wrong. And unlike someone who has had a brain injury throughout their life, someone who gets one, I was 33 at the time, you you assume, because the computer has always functioned, that it is. I assumed I was a productive person, and so I assumed I was taking care of myself. I assumed that I was doing things, and of course I had no productive function for quite a long time.
Yeah.
I was incapable.
Right. And so, how did you, or can you explain what a dynamic behavior is, and the strategies that have helped you overcome some of your challenges?
Um, People who have a diffuse brain injury uh, almost always have a lot more frontal lobe damage, and that's because just the way the brain sits in the skull, and we have these funny bony protuberances. So the end result is, when you have that diffuse injury and it smashes against the pavement or someone hits it or whatever, um, the frontal lobe gets more injury, and the frontal lobe is responsible for a lot of your memory and a lot of your executive function, your ability to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Sequence, plan, prioritize, that kind of thing. But it's also your emotions. So that means that we tend to have two kind of extremes of behavior. Most of us demonstrate both of them to some extent. I was more adynamic, which meant, of course, I wasn't speaking, but I also just had a wooden face. I didn't modulate my voice. I didn't have facial expression. As my grandmother used to say, it looked like there was no one in there. And which also, for people with brain injury who are adynamic, makes this very easy to ignore, because after all, you can talk around us. It doesn't seem like we're even listening, and we often, it's not like we really are in terms of understanding what you say, but we understand how you treat us. We do understand your condescension. We do understand that you're not talking to us anymore. You're not acknowledging us. So we feel very isolated by that condition. Mm-hmm. The opposite side of that coin is disinhibition, where we're very out there. We're very spontaneous. We tend to switch back and forth, very quickly. So you get me really riled up, motivated, which I would try and do with music and things. Then, of course, then we act out because it feels really good. And so we think we're being appropriate, but really our behavior is very exaggerated. Our speech is exaggerated. So we're quick to swear, quick to laugh, quick to tell the off-color joke, that kind of thing. So videotape works a great deal because you can see yourself. You can see, boy, you need to actually make eye contact. You need to, and so you were taught all these very mechanical strategies early on to either rein in the emotions, write it down before you speak if you're disinhibited, or if you're adynamic. Okay, I will now make eye contact. I will sit up straight in my chair. I have several questions on this piece of paper. I will ask them to the person in front of me. I will try and modulate my voice and make it more sing-song. That kind of thing. So you learn to do it very artificially, and it isn't that you fix those behaviors, but it is more that you, over time, you learn to incorporate them so that they become a more natural part of you. It takes years of practice, but it's these things are very doable. We can get back into our communities and our families if we have, help to work on a lot of these behavioral changes that we have.
Yeah, of course. And I think I know a lot of this stuff, and some of the stuff that you're talking about just from my own knowledge. And I studied psychology in high school. I was a psychology major originally, and just wanting to know more about also my brain and just like how things work. So I know a lot of this from what you're talking about, but it's especially nice, I would assume, as somebody who was a physician, um to so you can better understand your challenges and what you're or what you have been dealing with. So by the end of rehabilitation, you came to terms with the loss of your injury, and you said, "I would like to be the woman again. I would like to be that woman again." But she died in 1988. Do you believe you've lived like two lives? One pre and now one post your injury?
In a lot of ways, the person who gets stuck and is always hoping to return to that person they were, they're never going to be very happy, because that's not going to happen. I've made tremendous progress, and I continue to make progress every year. That's something about traumatic brain injury. If you keep working, keep pushing the envelope, you can make progress. But I'm very different. I live a very different life today. It's a great life. It's very satisfying. It's very wonderful. I'm very happy. I've learned new things and I do different things. Um, of course, I will always have the grief of the loss of my cherished profession. There were a lot of things about the old me that I love that just isn't there. Um, I think that's okay to grieve that. But yeah, sure, I'm a different person today. A happy one, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. So being a doctor, was it easier or was it harder to accept the consequences of your TBI?
um, well, down the line, you know, and we're talking way down the line. Probably easier for me to comprehend some of the subtleties of my TBI. Early on, I think it's across the board very difficult for us to develop awareness of what's wrong with us, and to respond to that appropriately and to then work on the strategies to help us move forward. Um, but I think, like many physicians, I was very tied to the identity of being a physician. I thought it was my life's calling. I was good at it, and so that meant that I didn't want to give up that dream. So it was very hard for me to move on. On the other hand, I had the huge advantage of already having a tremendous amount of education, um, already having a life partner, already having very well established friendships, all of which could help support me and help move me forward. Whereas someone who has their injury at, say, 16, or 18, and they're just trying to start college or they're still in high school, those friendships, those people, they move away because they're more casual relationships, and your dreams are all shattered, and it's very hard to figure out where you're going to go from that because you haven't actually established life. So in some ways, that person, I think, has a harder road.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would totally agree with you. So since your injury, have you had any subsequent um, falls or just kind of incidences with your head that have, made your challenges worse, or are you, stable, quote unquote, since the injury?
I do fall a lot. That's just part of the nature of
Right.
my lack of perception of my surroundings and things. But I work pretty hard to drop and roll and protect that head. I own a helmet for everything, whether I'm riding a horse, in a kayak, on a bicycle. Uh, you know, uh, I have a helmet for every occasion. Um, and so, no, I've been blessed not to have any other significant injuries to my head.
Okay. And you mentioned kayaking and bicycling and all of that. So you still do that to this day, obviously, with a helmet.
Yes, one of the best
Probably
things
brings you a lot of joy.
it does. And, as we know, for anyone who's trying to work on cognition, we know through research that physical exercise makes a difference. And I've always thrived on being out of doors, whether it's mountain hiking or in a kayak or on a bicycle. It took me a long time to ferret out how to ride on a bike again, just because I couldn't grasp the paying attention part. So I tended to run into parked cars and people and things. But I eventually learned that too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about your book, Over My Head, A Doctor's Own Story of Head Injury from the Inside Looking Out, which is obviously a very inspiring autobiography of you?
Well, I wrote the book because at that time I wanted to write the book that I needed. I wanted to write the book that I wish someone had written for me. I wanted to know that there was life after brain injury. That you could, okay, you can't become the person you were before, but can you achieve happiness? Can you create new dreams? Can you move forward? And and I thought, and because the book's been so successful and reprinted so many times, it obviously appeals to people because it's a universal story. It doesn't matter what kind of major loss you have, or whether your spouse dies, whether your child dies, whether you lose an arm or a leg. When you have a major loss in your life, if you're a person who's had great love and then you have considerable loss, you've got to move beyond that, or else you're wasting your life. You're just stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And most people who live a full life have great loss.
Mm-hmm.
That's just part of living. And so the book clearly has struck a chord. Not just, it's obviously used a lot by the brain injured community and people who know people who have brain injury, and certainly by professionals in the industry, but it's been very popular in general just because of the fact that it's just a universal story of moving on.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. And I think any book that has been written is an inspiring one, and one that hopefully teaches others. So what have you seen in the past, I don't know, you can say like 30 years or even like 10, 20 years in the medical advances of neurology and traumatic brain injuries?
Well, there have been huge changes. At the time of my injury, there was still that belief that whatever you got back in the first year was that was it, and you were stuck. And a lot of people got warehoused because of that, because you don't get much back in the first year. My family will tell you that it took 5 years before I was any fun to be with, and it took me 5 years easily before I could easily communicate with someone, so that I could communicate my thoughts and really grasp what they were saying to me, unless we're just telegraphing, do you want dinner now? But now we are, first of all, we're in the acute stage, we're treating brain injuries much more successfully. My injury, probably a lot of it was the secondary damage, because you have the initial injury and then there's a lot of edema and swelling. that continues on. And so changing some of that treatment makes a big difference, which we didn't realize back at the time I had my injury. So changing that acute treatment, obviously working more on preventing brain injuries in the first place, like getting everyone to wear helmets, those makes a big difference. And then realizing the crucial need for rehab. Unlike other kinds of disabilities, people with traumatic brain injury that they get after they're born, so they know a different life. Mm-hmm. Since they lack so much awareness, if you fill in all the blanks for them, they don't progress and grow. So for example, someone who always had a learning disability and they need a lot of props and help. Okay. But it's not that we don't need a lot of props and help, but we don't even grasp that we're not doing it ourselves. So if someone with a brain injury can't walk on their own without getting lost to school or to work or to their rehab program, they don't benefit from someone taking their hand and leading them every day, because then you'll lead them for the rest of their life. Okay, we need to be allowed to fail. We need to be allowed to rely on our strategies rather than you just filling in the blanks, so that we can realize, oh, okay, I don't like being cold. I don't like being lost. I needed to pay attention to the map, the recorder, all these things that have been set up for me. Now we need that background support. If I'm 5 miles off track in a snowstorm, I want you to show up. If I'm about to be picked up again for vagrancy, happened to me a lot, I want you to be there, you know. So you let me burn dinner every night. You don't let me burn the house down. Mm-hmm. And I learned again to become a good cook. I was a good cook before. There's no reason I couldn't become a good cook again.
Right.
Done a different way, very different strategies, but I could learn it if I realized that, you know, without you filling in the blanks so that the recipe all worked out, you know, because otherwise I'm not going to learn it. So that fostering independence piece, very tough love for parents and spouses, but it is a piece that really helps us to grow and change. And I think rehab programs awareness of that. We still have a lot of work to do because unfortunately, at a legislative level, there isn't the dollars put into rehab. So I was blessed to have a brain injury where I was struck by a car, and I live in Michigan, where my auto no-fault insurance, because I am a driver, has paid for my rehab and my ongoing work with my coach to this day. Whereas if I had swerved to avoid a squirrel and had the same injury, I would have had a few weeks of speech therapy, a few weeks of occupational therapy. They would have tried to teach me how to walk and how to speak, but they wouldn't have taught me where to go or what to say. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have progressed very well. I wouldn't have gotten what I needed. Instead, I had a great deal of rehab, and I've been able to become a very productive member of society afterwards, instead of just having caretakers all day long, you know.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think the whole point of rehabilitation, well, it is, you know, is to become as independent as you can. I mean, clear, you know, after an injury, clearly not everyone can be as able as you and I, but, you know, that is the goal, is to get to that level as much as possible.
With that acceptance piece,
yeah,
with brain injury, I do think it isn't the person who you know, the athlete who can't walk again. It isn't the Nobel Prize winner who can't do the simple math that's most disabled. It's the person who is stuck and not moving forward that's most disabled. Because if you can focus on your strengths and work around your weaknesses, there is so much you can do with life, even if you have tremendous limitations to some of the things that you couldn't do before. So there are ways to create for a lot of people, but they also need help, especially in brain injury. You do need that tremendous support community, which, I didn't do this alone. I work very hard every day, but, and I still work hard every day, but you you manage because there is that support community, because there are other people who are saying, okay, you want to do this, you can't do it the way you did before, this is a very convoluted route, but we can get you there.
Mhm.
That's how it is in real life. If the George Washington Bridge is out, you don't stop going to New Jersey.
Right.
You find a different way.
Of course.
And that's what it has to be in brain injury. And you're not going to necessarily come up with those different ways on your own, but with help you can. So,
Right. Exactly. So you discussed a lot about families coping with someone who has a TBI. What advice would you give to others, clearly families or caregivers, coping with an individual with a TBI?
first of all, don't allow yourself to burn out. So, in other words, bring in the troops, join support groups, become involved in your state and local chapters of the brain injury associations. Have a support group. You need to be able to talk to other people who um, are in your situation, because they're the only people who get the joke, who get the frustration, who understand what you're going through, because we are very frustrating to live with. The people who don't know brain injury, they're going to be saying to you things like, oh, isn't it wonderful Claudia is still alive. Meanwhile, you're thinking, oh my goodness, I have this little 5-year-old person in this adult body following me around all day who can't do anything, and it's not feeling kind of all wonderful, but you're always smiling and pretending, oh yes, it's wonderful, she's still with me. Well, but it isn't that easy to live with, especially when we're acting out in terms of our behavior, or have very inconsistent performance on everything we do because we're not very good at our strategies for years. So you need a lot of support. You need other people acting as coaches. You need other people to step in for you. You need to, it needs to be a team effort in
Mhm.
order for it to go well. And so you need to educate yourself and reach out and get that support, because no matter how much you love, you need other things getting you through this, because this is lifelong. And most families, they spend those 24-hour a day marathons at our bedsides when we're in a coma, uh, and that's not when we need you. We need you when we're awake. we
Yeah, absolutely.
we need you down the line, and we need you to be able to hang in for the long haul, because it really is a marathon, not a sprint.
Of course, absolutely. So, how important is a structured rehabilitation program?
I think it's pretty essential. You don't get better. When I finished my rehab program, and I was in New York in my rehab program, not counting stuff before that and ongoing stuff after, for about a year and a half. Um, you get building blocks, but those building blocks are essential tools so that you can keep building on them year after year after year. I wasn't very functional when I left rehab, which was a tremendous disappointment to my family. Um, but I had those tools to start building on. So each year I could become better and better and better, because I kept working and they kept finding ways to support that work, so that I could keep improving and improving. So each year, you know, you can't look like each week, but if you look each year, you could see, oh my goodness, look, the speech is better, the physical function is better. She's doing more things independently. She's learned more rote things again. She can look at her own planner that says mow the lawn, and she can go out and mow the lawn, um, not follow you around while you mow it. So it, I think that's that, um, the bigger piece.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So, what do you think is the most common misperception of what TBI is?
People think it's, oh, we don't have memory function. And I think they think that's it. They think, oh, we don't have a memory, and that's our problem. And man, if that was a problem, I've got lots of props for my memory. I record everything. I've got notebooks. I've got, you know, I can work around memory in a lot of different ways. And actually, a lot of my memory is good, especially some of my long-term memory. Can't find the file drawer. So if you say to me, oh, what did you have for lunch today? I don't know. But if you say to me, wasn't that a delicious lasagna we had together? And I actually had that, I probably will be able to find that file drawer and recognize, oh, yes, that was good. So, but they think memory is it. And they even ask us about that. Some of my favorite jokes are about memory. People will say, so when was the last time you had amnesia? Or how long has it been since you can't remember? Like we would have any idea,
Right.
not remembering is that. But I think that's the biggest misconception, that it isn't global. And they also think it's linear, they don't understand the inconsistency in our behavior.
Mhm.
That's kind of like, well, yesterday she successfully took the letter to the post office and mailed it. So today she ought to be able to take the letter to the post office and mail it. And it's not like that. Life is very complicated, and there are so many hiccups and distractions. So one has to be prepared for the fact that we fail a great deal. The trick is to learn to get back up again. When we teach when a baby is learning to walk, they fall constantly, and we fall a lot. That's the other thing. People will look at us and they'll see something we do wrong, and they'll say, well, I do that. Yes, it's just we do it hundreds of times a day instead of your 10 or 15 times a day, and that volume of errors is very disruptive to productivity.
Yeah. So lastly, what do you think, or what is a valuable resource for people with TBI, caregivers and families that want to learn more and kind of, find where they can get help?
They should definitely contact their state and local organization, and there's also a national organization for the Brain Injury Association.
Mhm.
And they're an excellent resource, because they can say, well, these are books that are out there that would be helpful. These are articles that we have, those kinds of things. So it's kind of that's more of that one-stop shopping. It also depends, kind of what they're looking for, and where they are in that journey. A lot of people who read my book, who write to me, though many have brain injuries, a lot of them are family members of people with brain injury, because it's kind of like, oh my goodness, that's what's going on with Kevin. Or they read it with the person who has the brain injury, because then, not that we're the same, because we all have a different experience and different levels of function, but because then you read a paragraph with Kevin, and then Kevin can say, okay, well, this is how I see it. And then you can begin to understand that person that you live with. So using resources like that too, I think, makes a difference.
It's wonderful. Those are wonderful resources. Well, this was so great. I've really enjoyed this interview with you. You have amazing knowledge, and you're doing amazing things.